from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Happy Thursday, Throwback Thursday. It's the Thursday night edition of the program. If you want to join our late night national town hall conversation, feel free to give us a call. 833-4825-337, 833-4-Valdez. And lots to discuss here, right? There was a bunch of things I want to talk about. If you haven't seen it already, it's on my Instagram story. The southern border, the razor wire that came into question and then was defended by one of the courts, or upheld, I should say, at the southern border in El Paso, was breached today. Now, this wasn't breached by, a mom with a few kids in tow looking to find a better way in America. A bunch of men, it looked like a riot, like looting. Literally, I mean a bunch, minimum of 50 people, violently ripped through this razor wire, plowing over the 5 or 6 Texas DPS officers that were there wearing fatigues, Department of Public Safety, and made their way to a larger wall fence barrier that was being, again, protected by what looked to be like the National Guard. And it is shocking to see this video. Really is shocking. And we have the audio of it. I want you just to hear, again, this footage, because it's really just quite jarring.
Yes, sir. Watch it.
It's the sound of victory as they get through. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Really is a shocking video. I haven't found it on Twitter. I saw it on Instagram, so I shared it there. You can check that out at Rich Valdez. Really, really is a shocking video. But that is something that occurred today in our history, right? Year of our Lord, as they say. Man, really just shocking. And it shouldn't happen, but it did. It's one of those things that I feel that, you can't just pretend these things aren't happening. Then you've got the Democrats releasing a proposed bill, 1,000-page bill, and they release it at 3 o'clock in the morning for a vote today, with some people saying, well, if you need some time, all right, we can vote on it tomorrow. Just imagine that. I don't even read my mail every single day, right? That's a little too much to read. But, of course, we can have 1,000-page bills that are put out. And, people, our folks in Congress are expected to read these things, as if nothing ever happened. I tell you, this is just what we're seeing happen from wherever. I mean, the border, literally. I'll tell you, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, you might have heard me say things like, I don't like to use the term open border because, in reality, it's not an open border. There are brave men and women of the Border Patrol there at the border. I've said that. I won't stand by that today. I was wrong. The border is open. But for some razor wire that was put there, this barbed wire put there by the courageous men and women of the Texas Department of Public Safety under the leadership of Greg Abbott, an amazing governor. I don't care what you say about your governor in Texas. This guy's doing what's got to be done. But I can't say with any good faith that our border's not open. If you want to get into this country, The easiest way is at our southern border. I mean, yeah, they're catching these people like the guy they caught from Lebanon who is an admitted Hezbollah trainee, says he was trained to kill people and that he was coming to the United States to make a bomb. Yep, that happened. That guy got in, and then they got him, and they locked him up, and who knows if he'll be deported or not. That's the other problem. Like when they do catch these bad guys, what happens, right? They had caught the guy that killed that poor little girl in Georgia, Laken Riley. They caught that guy. He was arrested in New York and released, made his way to Georgia to go kill her. And I don't say that with any joy, because I've been seeing a lot of articles, of people saying that the Laken Riley family is her family's upset. I'd be upset too, and they're citing the fact that they feel that her name, her legacy, her life has been politicized. And the reality is, I'm sure that in some respect it has been by somebody somewhere. But I can tell you, I'm not trying to politicize her name. I'm trying to draw attention to a tragedy that should never have happened. But it happened. And it's heartbreaking. It really, really is. And when you see these videos, or at least this one video that I saw today, the one I played you the audio of, where whoever was recording that, probably somebody who worked at the border, seeing these men just approach this razor wire and break right through it, trampling the guys that were putting up the razor wire or there to try to maintain it, only to make their way to the next checkpoint or security barrier, which is a more sturdy steel fence or wall. Crazy. I mean, really shocking. And again, maybe these people, maybe they are like Jamal Bowman, congressman from New York, who thinks that, he's supposed to go through that exit. Oh, wait, it's not an exit. It's actually a fire alarm. I mean, the stuff that I saw today, they should have been sounding an alarm. Absolutely atrocious. We'll get to Jamal Bowman in a little bit. We have a few things we could make fun of him on. But I got to tell you, it's an interesting place, right? So my hope is to get to the bottom of a little bit about what's happening in America. We always try to bring you the best guests and, offer you some of the best opinions from those guests and from you all and from me, and have this late night national town hall conversation. And we're going to do the same exact thing tonight. Our guest tonight, Senator Ron Johnson. He is the senator from the great state of Wisconsin. And we're going to chat with him. We're going to chat a little bit about immigration. We're going to chat a little bit about what's going on in Wisconsin. We're also going to discuss his thoughts on being given a 1,000-page bill shortly after 3 a.m. this morning and being asked to know what's going on. And not only that, Ron Johnson is one of those people I think would really make a good teammate with President Trump. Now, I realize that there could be some drawbacks given the political situation in Wisconsin, but it doesn't change the fact that I think he'd be an excellent running mate. So I'm wondering if he'd be open to that. Maybe I'll ask him when we get to that conversation with him. Plus, we've got Open Phone America coming up in the final hour of the program, and I want to make sure you guys call in because there's plenty to discuss tonight. And a few other really amazing guests that we have, which I'll reveal to you shortly. So you got to come back. Folks, I am Rich Valdez, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
Across America to the liberty-loving Latino, Rich Valdez.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back, familia. Amigos, we are on with Senator Ron Johnson. He's on the Senate Homeland Security Committee and the Finance Committee. Senator Johnson, welcome, sir.
So, Rich, hope you're doing well.
Doing fantastic. You're one of the strongest fighters out there. Every time so many people, so many of your colleagues, they get reelected and it's like no sweat off your brow. But when it's time for you to get reelected, there's always an uphill battle. It's always a big deal. And it's because you're doing your job, in my opinion. What's going on in the great state of Wisconsin?
Well, hopefully, more Wisconsinites are opening their eyes to the destruction of the radical left, which is the Democrat Party, which is the Biden administration. I think like other Americans, they're realizing that the dollar they held at the start of the Biden administration is now worth only 84 cents. I mean, now they may not know that statistic, but they're feeling it. They're feeling it at the grocery store. They're realizing if they want to try and buy a new house or trade homes, that their mortgage payments are going to be double. They're going to feel it when the Biden administration takes away their gas-powered car and force them into an electric vehicle that doesn't go more than, about 150 miles an hour if you're lucky, or 150 miles in range if you're lucky. Democrat governance has been a disaster for this country, and I just hope and pray that enough Wisconsinites recognize that and turn our 10 electoral votes over to President Trump and elect a new Republican U.S. Senator, Eric Hovde.
Amen to that. Now, Senator, the headline that I'm looking at says Congress to vote on a $1.2 trillion spending bill hours after a 3 a.m. release. Again, this is news from earlier today. What is going on?
Well, this is the very well-honed, dysfunctional process, but it's very well-honed process to mortgage our children's future. So leadership from both sides, this is the Uniparty, have figured out the best way of mortgaging our children's future, of massively increasing spending, is to not do a normal budget and then have that budget guide a functioning appropriation process where you bring up 12 individual appropriation bills early enough in the year prior to the fiscal year is funding, subject those bills to debate, amendment, so you can highlight different issues in the different appropriation accounts. Instead, what they do is they don't do anything in the prior fiscal year. The fiscal year ends, you have to all of a sudden get a CR, or you're going to have a government shutdown. That's like some big crisis. It wouldn't be, by the way. And that just continues. This year, it's continuing halfway into the fiscal year. But somebody, it's congressional staff, the White House, or whoever gets together, a limited group of people, write these 1,000-page-plus bills. They slam thousands of earmarks in them. I think these last two minibuses hold something like $13 billion worth of earmarks. That's the gateway drug to massive deficit spending. Drop it on members' desks, and members get 24, 48 hours to supposedly read it. You can't read it in that amount of time.
It's 1,000 pages, no?
The fix is already in. The earmarks have been appropriated. They've been allocated to the people that are going to vote for the bill, and that's how we mortgage our kids' future. And then it gets passed within 48, 72 hours, and everybody forgets about it, and you just move on. And we're in a situation where spending has gone from $4.4 trillion in 2019 to the president's budget is $7.3 trillion for next fiscal year. This year we'll spend certainly north of $6 trillion, which is about a 50-some% increase. I think 56% increase over 2019, just 4 years ago. And our population has grown 2%. And so we're increasing spending over 50%. Again, this is just complete madness, but it's not the way it's reported in the media. I mean, if anything, the media is reporting this as an austere budget. This account's only going up 2%. Or it's completely insane, but it's insanity backed up by the mainstream media. And so they don't really lay out how grotesque this process really is.
Senator Johnson, they expect you to read a bill that I understand to be 1,000 pages in a day or a day and a half or whatever, what have you. And this, to me, this is, it's unreasonable. Years ago, Nancy Pelosi, when she was doing it in the House, she said, well, you got to pass the bill to see what's in it. Maybe we're not at that stage now, but in effect, it seems like we're in exactly the same place.
Well, a few of these bills ago, I literally was able to object. They figure out how to prevent that from happening now. And I literally and I felt very sorry for the Senate clerks, but I made them read it out loud. And I sat on the floor the entire time. I think it was about a 690-page bill. And I sat on the floor the entire time. It took about 11 and a half hours just to delay the process, just to demonstrate how gross this is, but also to demonstrate how incomprehensible the bills are. So you read this thing, it's just basically gobbledygook. I mean, there are certain sections, I guess I kind of understand that. But no, you basically need a law library to go through, and you have to study this legislation. And the reason it really needs to be out there for a long period of time is you need to crowdsource the analysis of these things. You need people throughout the nation. You need experts in these fields to look at particular sections that affect their field and screen. But again, nobody has time for that, and we'll just move on, and the damage will be done, and we'll find out, sometimes years later, that was in that bill. I had no idea, which is why it's very easy for me to just vote no on these things.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to me. Folks, we're on with Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin. Now, Senator Johnson, the debate over TikTok, this is one, and I want your most candid view on it. I look at TikTok and I think that there is a national security threat, and it's obviously, a spying apparatus. Even if it's spying for the sake of selling advertising, it's definitely that. But I also have concerns about the government, forcing this divestiture on an American company one day. And I'm not sure if this is the right precedent to set. Where do you fall on this debate with TikTok, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll address the points you raised, but let me first go to, I think, what is even more basic. Have you ever seen the documentaries Social Dilemma or The Creepy Line? If you haven't, or anybody listening, if you're a parent and you're listening, watch those documentaries, and you will tightly control what your child does on social media. So the first question I ask is TikTok really worse than the other social media that our children are consuming? And I would argue it's probably not. Now, obviously it's owned by the Chinese government. They are using it to propagandize our children, just like the radical left is using their social media platforms to propagandize our children to the radical left views, okay? Mm-hmm. So, again, it's all damaging to our kids. You have the added element of the Chinese government using it as a surveillance tool. Well, don't you think our big tech media giants are using this as a surveillance tool as well? So you have to put this all in context. I share your concern about the federal government swooping in there, but I'm concerned about the national security interest. We shouldn't rush into this. I look at both sides of the arguments, and I think both sides have some very legitimate concerns. So I'm still studying this. I've not made up my mind.
Now, if you had a guess, where do you think some of your Republican colleagues are? Do you think that most of them are leaning towards putting the kibosh on TikTok or not?
My guess, it's probably similar percentages as you saw in the House vote. Probably more than enough support to pass it,
right.
But quite a few people kind of scratch their head going, is this really the right thing to do?
And let's talk about immigration a little bit, and we'll probably have to take a pause here, but it continues to be something that I think is literally destroying the very fabric of our country, because we went from having a system of immigration that was, legal immigration, where we accepted 1 million immigrants a year for work and this and that and other things that we, that were in line with our current policy, which, many argue doesn't work. And granted, maybe it didn't, to this utter bedlam that we have at the southern border. So I want to pick your brain on that when we return. Folks, we're on with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
The best guests, the best opinions. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. We're on with Senator Ron Johnson, talking about all of the hottest news stories of the evening. And one of the things that is a news story every single day, sadly, is the fact that we have record-breaking numbers of illegal immigrants coming into the country, crime like we've never seen it before. And it's all happening under the watch of who I like to call Joe El Baboso Biden. Senator Johnson, up to what end, right? Where do you see this eventually ending?
Well, there's so many horrific dimensions to this catastrophe. It's obviously a clear and present danger to our nation. You're looking at these camps down in the Darien Gap of Panama. By the way, the non-governmental organizations that are facilitating a lot of this, that we pay for, by the way, are located right by these installations, these camps where you have, for example, military-aged Chinese men. More than 150 nations people have come through. The Biden administration did this. The Democrats did this. They want an open border. They said that President Trump's closed border was inhumane. Well, there's nothing humane about facilitating the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet, the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers. But clearly, this is a huge national security threat. And the Biden administration literally is facilitating all this. They want an open border. It's clear. There was a very interesting video that just got released today. I retweeted it of about 100 migrants rushing and breaking through the Concertina wire and up against the fence with the Texas National Guard and their Texas Department of Safety. Just unbelievable. This is an invasion. I mean, it's an invasion, and that's what the Democrats want. To what end? I appreciate people like Elon Musk tweeting the reality that whether or not these illegals actually vote, and Democrats are trying to make it very possible for them to vote, mail-in balloting, relaxing all the controls over absentee balloting. But even if they can't vote, they're going to be counted in the census, and when they get counted in the census, that's going to provide more congressional seats for those generally blue sanctuary city types of districts, those states, and that will also change our electorate as well, whether or not these illegal immigrants vote right away or not.
And that seems to be the fear that most people have, is the way that this is going to revolutionize the way that we continue voting in America moving forward. But I think it comes with so many, I'm going to call them unintended consequences, although they're probably quite intended, like the stuff we're seeing with this gang and others. The Tren de Aragua, this Venezuelan crime syndicate, and other criminal enterprises that are just having at it. I mean, there's so many social media videos that I see on a daily basis of guys literally like telling their friends back home in Venezuela, make sure you come. When you come, we can invade their homes. They're like giving them instructions on how to become squatters or to, kind of wreak havoc to get people to leave their homes. This is some crazy stuff that I'm hearing, Senator.
Well, you read reports that crime's way down in Venezuela. Well, they've shipped all the criminals into America. They are emptying out their insane asylums and their prisons, that type of thing. Again, this is an invasion, and it's not good for America at all. And the reality situation is just as you stated. I mean, the people that come here, they have cell phones. They've got their friends. They got their family. They call them up and say, hey, that was easy. I mean, literally the policy of the Biden administration to CBP is they want CBP to encounter, process, and disperse these illegal immigrants in less than 8 hours. So come on, walk right across, turn yourself into CBP. You'll get put on a bus, a plane, or a train easily within 24 hours to the destination you want to end up at. It's overwhelming cities, large and small, school systems, law enforcement. Again, this is a catastrophe for this nation, and the impact will be felt for years, if not decades. America may never be the same. It may never recover from this.
That's really what I was thinking. When I say, to what end, I'm thinking, all right, so they get their power play for political votes and for apportionment and congressional redistricting and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we literally changed the face of America. And I don't mean it like some people say, the great replacement theory and whatnot, but I mean like literally like culturally in so many ways when you have the worst, right? The worst that Venezuela has to offer coming through the southern border and every other country. We don't know who these men from China are. We don't know who these men from northern Africa are. There's people from all over the place, and it remains a big mystery, a big question. I hear that some of the transitional housing that some of them are in, at least in New York, is scheduled to run out in a couple of months, meaning right before Election Day, there will be some chaos in these streets unless Biden provides more federal funding or some other way to calm that situation down. And I don't know if that helps him or hurts him going into the general in November, but I'm pretty sure things are going to get a lot worse before they get better.
Well, Democrats are unified in their quest for power. And so for them, it's all about winning elections, and they play for keeps. And so if they ever get the trifecta again, where they have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they're going to eliminate the filibuster. They will turn Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. into states. They'll get 4 new Democrat senators from that. They'll stack the Supreme Court so they can always assure the radical leftist stupid legislators on the court. So if what they can't pass through the legislature, they'll just dictate through the courts. This is their game plan. And they are well on the path. I just try and warn Americans that, Venezuela used to be an oil-rich nation, right? A very successful South American nation, but Venezuelans voted themselves into poverty in the course of a decade or two. I mean, and America is on a very, very dangerous path. I agree with Elon Musk quote. He said, it's got to be a red wave this November or America is doomed. And I truly believe that.
Yeah. Senator, and I just want a quick follow-up on something you said, because I constantly debate this with folks with respect to Puerto Rico and D.C. going Democrat if they were to become states. A, I don't see how they get D.C. to become a state if it's constitutionally protected. And B, the current resident commissioner and even the shadow governments that are in place for, like Puerto Rico at least, have Republicans, very conservative Republicans. And my thought is, if that were to be the case, I don't know that Puerto Rico would automatically be a blue state. So I feel like that might be an opportunity to pick up some Republican support.
Well, let's face it, the Democrats won't turn Puerto Rico into a state unless they are absolutely sure they get 2 Democrat senators. So, okay. So if you're right, they won't do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Folks, we're on with Senator Ron Johnson. We're coming right back to wrap up with him. And next topic of discussion, 2024. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, welcome back. Rich Valdez with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from the state of Wisconsin. Senator Johnson, there is so much going on every day. We hear more and more about I'm going to call it a persecution against former President Trump as he's going against Joe Biden for the presidency yet again. And Godspeed, I hope he wins. But every day there's something new. They're trying to take his buildings away. Now today they're saying they want to take away his golf course in Westchester County, New York, a property I've been to. It's a beautiful place. And it just amazes me that there isn't a financial company anywhere that's offering $500,000 bonds, and rightfully so. Nobody wants to do that at that level of money, and that the state is still requiring such. And I think to myself, so far a lot of this stuff has backfired when they come after Trump. But interestingly, I feel that they're just really desperate, and they're going to do anything they can to stop him. What are your thoughts? Well,
first of all, my guess is he can't use his buildings as collateral with business because those businesses are afraid of what New York State will do to them, what the radical left will do to them. I mean, I've just never seen ever in my lifetime a political figure more tormented, but more vilified and attacked, and the power the government used against one individual more than they've used against President Trump. And his supporters certainly understand this. They're highly sympathetic with what is happening, but it is a travesty of justice. What this administration and these radical partisan attorney generals and district attorneys are doing to President Trump, it's awful. I mean, lawfare, it's not a strong enough word. It's just a travesty of what's happening here. So it's why it's so important that we have a red wave. And by the way, if we do, the Republican Party better buck up as well. And we've got to fight, and we've got to be smart. We can't be so stupid. So that's everything. That's what I'm trying to do in the Senate with the Senate Republican conferences, try and get us focused on the fact that the left is destroying this country. You know, Rich, if you were asked to develop a strategy to destroy this country, you could not come up with a better game plan than what President Biden and his radical left Democrat colleagues are implementing or imposing on America. You just couldn't do it. The open borders, 40-year high inflation, massive deficit spending, war on fossil fuels, the embarrassing danger surrender in Afghanistan, which has emboldened our enemies. I mean, this is destroying this country. They've got to be stopped.
You know, Senator Johnson, I could not agree with you anymore. And, folks, we're on with Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Make sure you check out his website. Give him a follow. This is he's one of the good guys out there. And, Senator, when we look at everything you just mentioned, right, you just laid it out. You're right. Not even, I think some of our enemies could have come up with a plan this good. It had to be an inside job with influence from some of our enemies is how I look at it. But this plan that's being implemented to weaken and soften America right from the underbelly straight through the rest of what America is in full swing. And I think there's a lot of people that are trying to stop it, from folks in the African American community to folks that used to be Democrats. A lot of people are jumping ship with their old way of thinking, and they're saying, "Hey, enough's enough." Yeah, right. But there's still a lot of work to do. And that being said, should you get a tap on your shoulder from President Trump saying, "Hey, you should be the guy that runs with me as vice president," do you run?
Well, first of all, if asked, of course I do it, but I won't be asked, and I shouldn't be asked. If I were to run for vice president and win, we would lose this U.S. Senate seat. We've got a Democrat governor in Wisconsin, and he would appoint a Democrat. So, I mean, nobody's going to ask me to do that because we need to gain a majority in the U.S. Senate, maintain a majority in the House, and we have to win the presidency. I mean, we need to win the trifecta here so we can just begin to repair the damage that's been done by the Biden administration. And that's, quite honestly, my greatest fear. If we do win this, things have really degraded so terribly. It's going to be one heck of a job to turn this situation around, and you don't have a whole lot of time to do it before the electorate starts holding you responsible and blaming you for the damage done by the Democrats. So we could be like the dog that catches the car, right? And we catch it, now what do we do with it? That's why we have to be prepared. And that's what I'm trying to do, leading a process in the Senate to elect good leadership that can focus on what we need to do and be far more effective at countering the ideology and policies of the radical left that are destroying this country.
Senator, in the minute and a half or so that we have remaining, as part of your committee work on the Homeland Security Committee, there's a lot of stuff going on with Ukraine. A lot of people are upset that Biden started the State of the Union saying, we've got to be able to fund more funding for Ukraine. A lot of people are upset with what's happening in the Middle East. What words of hope can you offer the listeners?
I often tell people I'm not the most uplifting character because I tell the truth and I describe reality. Right now, the reality is not very good. Listen, I think more Americans, certainly recognize. First of all, they're very sympathetic with the freedom-loving people of Ukraine. They realize that Vladimir Putin's a war criminal and they want to support him. But they also realize, we better secure our border first. And that's quite honestly what Mitch McConnell blew. I mean, there should not have been secret negotiations. Nobody's looking for an immigration bill. We wanted an enforcement mechanism to force President Biden to use the authority he has that he used to open up the border to close it again. But that didn't happen. So I certainly hope that in some way, shape, or form, again, I don't mind helping the people of Ukraine, but $60 billion to fuel a bloody stalemate, you got to recognize the reality that Vladimir Putin will not lose that war. So we've got to use whatever influence we have to bring that war to an end through negotiation. It's the only way it ends. Every day that goes by, the result gets worse and worse. So we have to recognize that awful reality. And the other reality is Israel can and must win and destroy Hamas. Quit harassing them. Don't be like Senator Schumer asking for the replacement of the Israeli government.
Right.
We've got to support the Israeli government, the Israeli people, because they are unified in recognizing they've got to destroy Hamas.
Senator Ron Johnson, let everybody know how they can keep in touch with you and support your campaign and the work that you're doing.
Well, it's just ronjohnson.senate.gov is my Senate website. I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter as well. So, again, I just ask everybody to get involved, make sure you vote. We need that red wave. We've got to defeat these radical leftists.
Outstanding, sir. Well, you are a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot. I thank you for making the time to join us tonight. Godspeed.
God bless you. Take care.
Yes, sir. All right, folks, we're coming back with your calls and a couple of other things that I've got up my sleeve. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, familia, welcome back, amigos. And we continue our discussion. Now, earlier I mentioned Congressman Jamal Bowman. He's a Democrat from New York. And today he was at a press conference for the Green New Deal, discussing specifically the Green New Deal in public housing. And his comments were just really, really interesting. Check this out.
It is plantation capitalism to have someone paying 40, 50, 60% of their salary towards rent. That is plantation capitalism. Rent should be capped at 20% of someone's salary. That's where we need to take it.
Okay, so again, I understand they're talking about public housing, but the idea that you can control the market like that is, one, incredibly just mind-boggling to me. Number two, it doesn't surprise me in the least. This is coming from a guy who's calculating plantation capitalism. This is the guy that literally pulled a fire alarm and said he thought it was a doorway marked exit. Now, we all know in case of emergency, break here doesn't look like an exit sign, but that's Representative Jamal Bowman, right? And ultimately, it's these types of, I don't know how to describe them. I'm going to use the word communistic styled rhetoric, right? Because this is ultimately workers of the world unite. This is that type of rallying cry saying, this is how you get the people, right? This is how the proletariat is activated by the commies, that you should only have to pay 20%. Of course, if you're downtrodden and you're all messed up, and like I have been in my life, even right now, I would love to only pay 20% of my income in housing, and maybe I do. I haven't done the calculation lately, but my point is the idea is not to control how much you spend by way of the government controlling it, a government price control, but more so to have such a robust economy that we can all succeed. There's a reason why I don't have a house in Beverly Hills. There's a reason why I don't have an oceanfront condo in Miami Beach. I can't afford it. That's the point that I'm making. Anyway, Congressman Bowman, watch out for those doors. And if they say exit, they're doors. If they say break here for fire, they're not doors. Anyway, folks, we're coming right back. We're going to continue our conversation on the latest on what's going on with tech policy, big tech, Joe Biden, and more. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, Here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Happy to be with you this Thursday evening, Throwback Thursday. And our phone number, if you want to join our late night national town hall conversation, give us a call, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. And there has been a surge of 962% of missed deportation filings during the Biden administration. That's, I'm going to round that up, folks. Guilty as charged, 1,000% increase in, or at least nearly 1,000% increase in missed deportation filings. Biden is a disaster, in particular at the border and generally across the board. I can't think of an area that, the only area that's done well is government spending, and obviously that's detrimental to the American people too. Absolutely disgraceful. And we're going to talk about the border. We're going to talk about really about trafficking and the harms done to children at the bottom of this hour. So stick with me on that. We also have this update, right? You've got Merrick Garland. He is the Attorney General of the United States, and they are going after none other than Apple. The Department of Justice is suing Apple over an iPhone monopoly in what some are saying is a landmark antitrust case. Check this out.
We allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power, not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse. If left unchallenged, Apple will only continue to strengthen its smartphone monopoly. But there's a law for that. The Justice Department will vigorously enforce antitrust law.
So that's Merrick Garland, Attorney General of the United States. Now, the DOJ is suing Apple in this antitrust case, saying that the iPhone maker has a monopoly on the phone market, the smartphone market, that is harming consumers. I would just argue at that point, facetiously, that the Democrats have a monopoly on our tax dollars. And it's harming Americans. But yet nobody's making that case, right? I think Trump's making that case, and so many Americans have his back. But it's just crazy to see how they pick these things. I'm not defending Apple. I'm just saying it's just interesting. It really is. Anyway, saying that there is, and this is true, I think, the way that they have the stranglehold on developers and rival companies really can't tap in. Is it a competitive advantage or is it monopoly? We're going to get into that in a moment. Apple's entire ecosystem, from the Apple Watch, to Apple Pay, supports this monopoly, according to Garland and his team. And the challenge here strikes at the core of Apple's model and what that they call the walled garden. And this comes as no surprise. I think most people see this and have been scrutinizing and really being critical of Apple for a while. So we're going to see how that stuff turns out. I want to talk about that as well as this Missouri case, the case of the Surgeon General and the state of Missouri. This is an interesting one because there were oral arguments just a day or two ago. And what was important about this case was, again, this is the case of big tech colluding with the executive branch. And this is an important case, so I want to get to that as well. But let's take it from the top here and let's discuss Apple with our guest, because we've got somebody who knows exactly what's going on. He has his finger on the pulse. Daniel Cochrane is with us. Daniel Cochrane, welcome.
Rich, it's great to be with you tonight.
Thank you. And Daniel is a senior research associate at Heritage, dealing with tech policy. Now, I know you're in the thick of it when it comes to this stuff, as most of us see these headlines and we go, yeah, big whoop, what's going on? TikTok, right? That's all we keep hearing about. But there's a lot of things happening in the big tech world. And you heard the clip from Merrick Garland, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that. if you don't mind, to just kind of walk us through that. Do you think the DOJ is out of line here? Do you think that they're on target with Apple being a monopoly? I think I can see instances for both. What say you?
Well, it's not often that I can say that the Biden administration is doing something right, but I can say that on this one, I think they are right. Apple, as General Garland noted, has a troubling history of entrenching its monopoly through an approach called a walled garden. And that essentially means that what Apple does is it says, if you use an Apple iPhone or an Apple product, you can only use software or services that Apple makes or endorses. And if you try to use other services, so if you try to what's called interoperate with other apps, say you use their messaging feature and you want to send a message to a non-Apple supported messaging feature. Well, while Apple's messaging feature has end-to-end encryption, it no longer is encrypted when you send it to a non-Apple supported product or service. And so what Apple does is it uses a lot of these small techniques to essentially advantage its own products and prevent competitors from competing with it, offering better alternatives and often less expensive alternatives. Apple charges 30% on in-app purchases. So any time that you use an app and you make a payment, Apple gets 30% of that. And they prevent alternative payment processors from competing with them. So these are just a variety of ways that the company has entrenched its advantage in the marketplace. And the DOJ, along with 16 states, has said, look, that's got to stop. Apple should compete on the quality of their services and not use their size to disadvantage competitors.
I think that makes sense. And as you're describing it, it literally sounds like my journey from having a Samsung that operated on Android, and I felt almost forced to go with Apple, but it wasn't at the hands of Apple. It was at the hands of my two daughters that both had Apple. And then they were like, Dad, we want to FaceTime you. And I had to do that because there was no interoperability between an Android video call and an Apple video call. And you're right. The messaging feature, again, iMessage is closed to Apple people. But I think there are some advantages to that if you are part of the unique club, right, that's signed on to Apple. Those messages go through super fast. If I'm sending a video, it's like a 1.5, 2 minute long video, it won't go through on Android to Android typically. You'll have to use like one of those file transfer services. But with iPhone to iPhone, pops right through. And there's AirDrop, and so there's some advantage to being in their little fiefdom, if you will. But thank you for that analysis. I appreciate it because, again, this stuff broke today, and it's very interesting news. Folks, we're going to continue with Daniel Cochrane and get his take on what's going on with the Missouri case here, Murthy versus Missouri, when we come back, plus our phone number. If you want to join us during this segment for calls on this topic, you're welcome to do that. And if you want to join us after the bottom of the hour, you can do that as well on Open Phone America, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back, amigos. We continue our discussion with Daniel Cochrane from the Heritage Foundation. And part of the discussion in the oral arguments for the Murthy versus Missouri case, again, that's the case of the Surgeon General of the United States versus the state of Missouri. And the argument here, as I understood it, was whether the federal government can be in touch with social media organizations and whatnot over what they felt was dangerous speech. And coercing these social media platforms to censor certain people. Now, I think the oral arguments that we heard 2 days ago were based on the idea that this wasn't coercion; it was more persuasion, and they were suggesting. And I think that's not the case. And just from media reports, you could probably make that case. But that's the question at hand: were Americans' free speech rights violated? And the reason that's the question is because our government was involved. Had they not been involved, then that wouldn't be the question, as I understand it. Daniel Cochrane, did I sum that up correctly?
Well, I think you got to the heart of it, and unfortunately, it sounded in the oral arguments, and it's always hard to sort of read the tea leaves on these things, but it did sound like many of the justices were skeptical of Louisiana and Missouri's arguments that the government was using their power to coerce the companies to suppress American speech around COVID-19 and the 2020 elections. And I think the confusion comes from the reality that the companies and the government have had a very long-standing relationship. I mean, the government and these social media companies were working together long before COVID-19. It really started back in the early to mid-2000s, the war on terror. And at that time, it was mainly the national security agencies within the U.S. started, building partnerships with Google and early Facebook to try to, address terrorist activity and content on the platform. So ostensibly, it started with a good intention. But over time, those relationships blossomed and developed in ways that we saw sort of exposed in not just this case, but also in the Twitter files, where now the agencies that were designed to protect American elections and protect our rights are now weaponizing their very powerful tools and influence against those rights. So that's sort of, I think, what was on full display on Monday, and it was kind of sad to behold. But again, we'll see what the Supreme Court does.
And Daniel Cochrane, from the I guess the outset of this, I guess that's a logical place for them to land, to say, no, we weren't twisting anybody's arm, but we were saying, hey, look, we don't think that's a good idea. Do you think that this is going to hold much water with the justices? I know you said that some of them remain skeptical. What's your take on the split? Do you think it falls like conservative versus liberal, like 5-4 type of thing, or more?
If I were a betting man, unfortunately, I would bet we lose. And I think we're actually it'll be a split. It won't just be liberals and conservatives. So I think it will be all three liberals. So Justices Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan voting with the government, and I think probably joined by Justices Roberts, Kavanaugh, and we'll see what Justice Barrett does. She seemed like she seemed pretty skeptical of Missouri and Louisiana's claims, but she could go either way. But one thing I want to note for your listeners is Justice Roberts and Kavanaugh were both in the Bush administration. So Justice Kavanaugh was in the Bush White House, and Justice Roberts was in the Solicitor General's office. So they're both used to kind of the politics of Washington, where you have these sort of behind-the-scenes conversations. And then both of them referenced, and Justice Kagan even referenced, we do a lot of informal sort of or significant persuasion around here, referring to the kind of offhand conversations you'd have with a member of the press when you don't like a story they wrote. And I think the difficulty for those justices in particular was, what's the difference between the government having that sort of offhand conversation with a reporter and the government having the conversation with a social media company? Of course, I think there's a massive difference, and the massive difference is that the effect of having a long entrenched relationship with social media companies that mediate speech for millions of Americans is that when you, quote unquote, persuade them, the end result is millions of people lose their ability to speak on certain issues of public concern. So that's where I think the breakdown is, but we'll see what happens in the end. Again, you can never quite predict these things, but we'll see.
Yeah. I'd like to see a leak of this, right? The way they leaked the the abortion case.
Yeah.
That would be great. Now, I want to switch gears, and we have a couple of minutes before we have to part ways. And I want to get your take on TikTok. TikTok, there's a lot of talk about it. Obviously, it's the investment from the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is of concern. I think right now, obviously, any social media company can be of concern because of the popularity of social media in our country, but in particular TikTok. And I've heard the national security concerns, and I think I agree with most of them. What I don't know that I agree with is the libertarian in me feels like the government really shouldn't have a place forcing divestiture on companies in a whimsical way, right? And we just saw the government doing that now to Apple. So my thought process here is, I don't know if maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but where do you land on this, and what are your thoughts on this proposed forced divestiture and ban of TikTok?
Well, it's really important for your listeners to know that this is not a ban of TikTok. What it's saying is that one of the most influential apps in the country and indeed in the world shouldn't be controlled by a foreign adversary. And the bill
right.
that your listeners know as the TikTok bill, what it would essentially do is say, look, if you want to operate in our country, you can't be under the control of one of four adversaries. That's China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And if you're under the control of one of those, an entity within one of those countries, and you're influenced by the government of those countries, then there's a lengthy process that the executive branch would have to go through in order to declare you as an entity that's covered by the law. So they'd have to provide a rationale to Congress 30 days before acting. Congress would have, and this is, by the way, this is all public. Congress would then evaluate it and would have time to act before any final determinations are made. One thing I want to also note is that we already do this for other kinds of industries. So, for instance, in existing law, there are restrictions on foreigners owning telecommunications companies, for instance, or real estate. So, and there are agencies that enforce those rules. So
right.
Here we're simply treating TikTok similarly to other kinds of industries, and we're doing it for national security and in a way that respects speech and liberty for everybody.
Well, that part all makes sense. I think the concerns that I would have, and I think others share, is kind of the way they put that poison pill into the Restrict Act. And I don't know how that's going to land, once this makes its way to an actual vote in the Senate. But we'll bring you back once that happens. Daniel Cochrane from the Heritage Foundation, I want to thank you for being with us, sir. You're a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot.
Thank you, Rich.
You bet. All right, folks, we continue our conversation on the exploitation of children, what's going on with athletes that are trans, and more. Don't go anywhere.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. And we continue our conversation tonight because there's plenty to discuss. And I want to keep you up to speed. Now, we've got the founder of SAVE, which is an organization focused on fairness and due process on college campuses. Edward Bartlett is with us, and we're going to talk about transgender setbacks, right? You got trans athletes that are, typically wreaking havoc. You've got a very interesting thing. I mean, I see some sports where people are thrilled. Like the other day, I saw a little girl, and she was wrestling a boy, and she was beating the snot out of this little boy. And I don't know, she had to be like maybe, I'm going to say 12, and he was probably 12. And when she won, she made history for being like the first girl wrestler. And I guess the question I have is, in some sports they let girls compete with boys, and others they don't. And I have two little girls, college age now, and I wouldn't want them competing with boys. But Edward Bartlett, give us an update on what's going on.
Well, hi, Rich. Good to chat with you. And actually, I'll start by just sharing a very personal experience. So I'm in love with the sport of ice hockey, and I've coached ice hockey and I've played ice hockey. And as an adult, I was involved in a intramural ice hockey game, and there were a couple females on the other team, and accidentally, I just sort of, you know how it is in hockey. You collide with other people.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't intend any kind of harm, but later I was told that this woman I crashed into, that she had a brain concussion. So, it just illustrates the total insanity, the absolute insanity that we would be, inviting biological males who now say that they are transgender to compete in, whether it's boxing or rugby or volleyball, you name the sport, it's total insanity.
Yeah, I'm with you. I really am with you. I again, another example of again, and I know some people are proud and others are not. When my daughter's a cheerleader, and when she was in high school, she one of her friends, lovely little girl, tried out for football and made the team, and was playing football on the field, and she was the only girl on the field. And in my head, I was thinking, oh my God! Like I saw one tackle, and they took her down, and the way they grabbed her, like the guy's hand was between her legs, trying to pull her down, and I, in my head, as a dad, I was just like, I would hate for that to be my kid, but her dad was there, and he was like, go get him, and it was just so interesting. And in my head, I look at things through the lens of politics oftentimes. And I think he was probably looking at things through, I want my kid to be able to do whatever she wants to do. And I don't fault him for that. But when it gets to like what you were talking about, professional boxing or even professional MMA, I've seen, people have skull fractures from dealing with, competitive fighters that claim to be women now that are really men, and, are beating the snot out of women athletes because they're men and they're so much bigger.
Well, you may have heard about this incident that was in New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago. It was a basketball game, and one team, it was supposedly girls high school, right? But one of the teams had two transgender males. I think it was one transgender male, and he was not only towered physically, but he actually caused two injuries to his opponents just in the first half, and literally the bench was depleted, and they had to forfeit the game. They had no more players.
I do remember. I think we covered that here on the show. That they said, forget it, we're going home. This is a slaughter.
So the story. I mean, literally every day I see yet another story that just makes me shake my head. With really across the board. I mean, cycling is another example where they've had in the Chicago area, they've had, a number of transgender biological males competing in the women's cycling, setting records and all that stuff. But I mean, it has to be enormously disheartening to be a female athlete and to see your opponent who's a biological male, taller, bigger, stronger, larger lungs, etc. It has to be very disheartening, and it's just fundamentally unfair.
I agree with that. And Edward Bartlett, how are you involved in the process in the mix? Are you guys taking them to court? Are you spreading awareness? How does SAVE get involved?
Yeah, good question, Rich. So SAVE, and our website is saveservices.org. So we have actually created a a group called the Title IX Network, which consists of over 200 national, state, and local organizations. Let's just, if we can, go back a step here. Title IX is the federal law that's designed to end sex discrimination, and that's good. Unfortunately, Biden has not only politicized this, he's weaponized this by saying, well, wouldn't it be a pretty nifty idea to change the definition of sex to include gender identity? And so even though that regulation still is not in place, but many schools have basically taken their cue from the proposal and said, hey, that's a wonderful idea. We all believe in tolerance. We all believe in inclusion, don't we? So let's go ahead and have these biological males. It's just absolute insanity.
Folks, we're on with Edward Bartlett. He is the founder of SAVE, and we're going to continue our discussion on what's going on with all of the wokeness infecting America when we return. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. This is America. This is Night. This is Rich Valdez.
So, former President Donald Trump recently, in one of his videotaped messages, made a comment about abolishing this idea of gender identity in sports and preventing males from competing in women's sports, vice versa. And of course, he took heat for that, but it was a good thing. And something else he's talked about is questioning the need for a federal Department of Education. Indeed, this is something President Ronald Reagan also questioned, saying back when he ran that, he was calling for to abolish the federal Department of Education. And it's something I grew up hearing from Reagan and have always questioned myself. Why do we have one and why do we need it? In effect, in my opinion, today, the Department of Education has become nothing more than a bank with, purchasing these loans and operating these loans. And it is, in effect, a bank. But I wonder if it'll ever actually happen. Our guest is Edward Bartlett. He is the founder of SAVE, and he's with us. Edward, tell us your thoughts on banning the Department of Education or disbanding it as it currently exists.
Yeah, that's a fair question, Rich. I'll tell you that personally, I used to work for the federal government. I worked for 17 years for the Department of Health and Human Services, and it was a wonderful experience. I was very happy about my time there. But that said, when I look at what is going on at the Department of Education, we basically have a bunch of culture warriors, okay? They don't care what the Supreme Court has said about, the definition of sexual harassment. They don't care that the Constitution says that all legislative powers lie with the Congress. They don't care about a law called the Administrative Procedure. They just don't care. They are culture warriors, and they're going to do it their way. So, and I say that kind of reluctantly, but personally, I am embarrassed to see what is going on with federal employees who, in order to become an employee, they took an oath of office saying they would uphold the Constitution. So it's really a sad day. The Department of Education has an annual budget of $52 billion, billing with a B, and yes, that's a heck of a lot of money. So the idea behind Donald Trump's admonition is that this money should be block granted to the states, to the state departments of education. Let them handle these issues, and stop giving so much power to these culture warriors in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I love the way you've termed them culture warriors, because I think so many of us are culture warriors, myself included. But I don't work for the government, so I'm free to do what I want. I think it's a problem when you're limited by the confines of the law and all these other things and the administrivia that comes along with working in a federal bureaucracy, and still you don't care for it. It's just an interesting position for them to take. And that's what they're trying to do. And I think that's part of the problem that we have with Washington, is that you have too many bureaucrats that, not that they're given this power, but they take this power. They kind of amass this power on their own, and voila, you get the swamp, as many people call it. And do you think in your lifetime and mine we'll see the weakening, perhaps even dissolution of a federal Department of Education?
I think there's no doubt in my mind that we will see a reduction in the budget, reduction in the congressional appropriations, especially if the Republicans take over the Senate. I'm certain that will happen, because that actually was in the bill that came out of the House of Representatives. So, I'm not going to predict the future with too much specificity, but I think it's fair to say the Department of Education is facing a day of truth when people say, you guys have really, you have violated your constitutional oath of office, and we're going to cut back your funding, and maybe we'll, send a lot of this funding to the states.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Now, Edward Bartlett, I want to touch on the next topic, which is DEI. There's a piece in Wall Street Journal talking about banning DEI quackery in medical schools, and I want to touch on that in the subsequent segment. So stick with me, folks. We are on with Edward Bartlett. He is the founder of SAVE, S-A-V-E. It's an organization focused on fairness and due process on college campuses. Check out their website at saveservices.org, saveservices.org. I'm Rich Valdez, coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
So glad to be on your show, Rich. It's just an amazing broadcast that I hope the rest of America listens to every day.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, welcome back, familia. We continue our conversation, and what I want to get into now is this piece of the Wall Street Journal about banning diversity, equity, and inclusion quackery in medical schools. Edward Bartlett, tell us more.
Yeah, Rich. Well, I'm sure you recall, I think it was last month, they had this problem with doors flying off of the airplanes.
Oh, my goodness.
When they were up in the air.
Yeah.
And so people started joking, well, was that because of the diversity hires at Boeing? And, now the problem is spreading. So we have the National Institutes of Health. They have been giving out these grants. It's called FIRST, F-I-R-S-T. Forgive me while I tell you what that acronym stands for. Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation. Wow, whoever came up with that acronym deserves some kind of award, I guess. But think about it. When you go to your doctor, do you want to have to ask your doctor, well, were you a diversity hire, or did you get admitted to medical school solely on the basis of your academic performance? Or if you're reading a research study, do you really want to have to, wonder, well, did that researcher do that research because, or were they doing that research because they were, again, a diversity DEI hire? Of course, we heard all of the bizarre tales at Harvard Medical School with the plagiarism problem among the DEI administrators. So there's so much, it's just hard to imagine all the mischief that could arise from this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what do you think the future holds for so much of this? I know in recent years we saw the rise of DEI and DEI officers in 2020, but I think by 2022 and 2023, we'd seen a lot of those positions become defunded and, organizations realizing this isn't really helping us. And I think so many big corporations were doing it because it seemed like the socially responsible thing to do, not necessarily their pledge to wokeism, but maybe I'm wrong. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, let's just go back to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. It says people will be treated equally under the law, and the people will not be favored on the basis of, race or sex or whatever. So we're really talking about a bedrock constitutional idea here. Of course, back in June, the Supreme Court ruled that Harvard and University of North Carolina could not be biasing their admissions process on the basis of an applicant's race. Of course, that was a big step in the right direction. But bottom line is, DEI, some people think that means DIE, but no, it means diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But, it's become so entrenched. But yes, they are being pushed back. There are actually 9 states that have passed laws that seek to rein in DEI, at least in college campuses.
Well, thank God they have. Now, Edward Bartlett, I want you to let everybody know, in addition to the website, how they can follow you online or through social media so people can keep up to speed with the wonderful work that you're doing at SAVE.
Well, we actually have several Facebook pages. We have one that focuses on false allegations, and that's called Save for Falsely Accused. That's the name of it. We have another one for people who are focused on college and school issues. That's called Save for Save for Victims and Survivors. So anyway, do a search on your Facebook, browser, and you can find any of our Facebook pages. And I should also mention, while we're talking, Rich, this crazy regulation, Title IX regulation, has not been finalized. It's still right now at it's called the Office for Management and Budget, OMB, which is part of the White House. And they are giving their final look over and final approval. So go online. People can actually schedule a meeting with OMB and give them a piece of your mind, what you really think about, biological males and women's sports.
Outstanding. Edward Bartlett from SAVE, thank you for everything. SaveServices.org. Sir, you're a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot, and I thank you for being here. Folks, Open Phone America is coming up right now. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Welcome to the Thursday night edition of the program. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're free to call 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. And it's Open Phone America. That's a time-honored tradition here on this program. Again, I say this every now and again, and just as a reminder to everybody, I'm the new guy here, but this program has been around for as long as I've been alive, right? Larry King started this show, taking over from Long John Nebel at the time. But 45 years ago in 1978, the year I was born, and did that for 15 years. And then came in his news guy, the late, great Jim Bohannon, who just rocked the airwaves on this microphone for another 3 decades, continuing the tradition of the guest interviews in the first 2 hours of the program, followed by Open Phone America in the third hour. And I intend to honor that as long as I'm able to here as well, and I'm honored to be here with you. The phone number, 833-482-5337, if you want to weigh in. And plenty to discuss tonight. I know we have some people online. We're going to get to you momentarily. But some of the stories I'm looking at, man, it never surprises me, or it never ceases to surprise me, how interesting the news is sometimes, right? First of all, today is the date of Pocahontas' death. She was 22 years old. She died in 1617. And I didn't know that, but now I know. And today as well, today in history, in 1790, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia became the first United States Secretary of State. So how's that for not knowing stuff, right? I'm pretty sure a bunch of you did know that, but I did not know that stuff. Now, something I want, this is a really good one. Hold on. See, I'm trying to get to the news, but I got too much trivia here. Today, in 1989, Dick Clark retired from hosting the TV show American Bandstand after 33 years. I can tell you right now, let this be a prayer amongst us all, that I can host anything for 33 years. It would be the opportunity of a lifetime. It really would. I would love to do that. And a TV show would be so much fun, too. Although radio is really my first love. But come on, who wouldn't want to do both? Anyway, I want to get to the news. Let's go to the news. We have this story here. 3 juveniles in Texas, 11, 12, and 16 years old, arrested for what? Robbing a bank. We'll get into that. Kyle Rittenhouse, you remember him, Kenosha, Wisconsin, hero. He was shouted off the stage at the University of Memphis for a speech. He was there giving a speech, and they were rude. We'll get into that. I think we have an audio clip of that. Then we have a family in Virginia that was forced to change school districts to protect their children from gangs. Caveat, the gangs were elementary school-aged kids. Things are getting rough on these streets. And a pig kidney has been transplanted into a human for the first time ever. We'll talk about that. There's so many good ones in here. But I also want to get to your calls. And, of course, continue any of the threads that we've had earlier this evening. We've talked about take 2, diversity, equity, and inclusion debacle that's going on, the potential abolition of the Federal Department of Education, and the problems that present themselves when you allow men to compete in women's sports. Of course, we also had a discussion with Senator Ron Johnson in the first hour about everything that's going on in Congress, from the TikTok ban to this bill that was dropped on them this morning at 3 a.m., 1,000-page bill. And they said, hey, can we vote on this today? No, how about tomorrow? The Democrats are just out of control. And of course, we talked about the enforcement action by the Department of Justice against Apple for being a monopoly. So plenty to get into tonight. And I want to get to your calls because I'm curious to know what you guys think about these things. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, and that we talked about earlier, was the diversity, equity, and inclusion quackery, as it's labeled in the Wall Street Journal, in medical schools. And this is medical schools in general have been a bone of contention for quite a while with a lot of people. And Frank in Cumberland, Maryland, has some thoughts that he wants to share. Frank on WCBC, go right ahead.
Well, I'd like to know what makes Edward Bartlett think he's going to do any good. The people have been talking about this the same way for decades. I'm looking at an article by Linda Chavez, if you remember her.
Sure.
Her.
She's from CEO.
It was in the New York Post, and it stated June 21st, 2001. And she's going on, she says, and she gives statistics. She says at the University of Washington School of Medicine in 1997, the odds ratio of a black applicant being admitted over a white with the same grades and MCAT scores were nearly 30 to 1. At the State University of New York, Brooklyn, the odds were nearly 23 to 1 in 1996 and were 9 to 1 in 1999. At the University of Maryland in 1999, there were 21 to 1. At the University of Georgia in 1996, there were 19 to 1. And she goes on to say that that's not the whole story even. And this is decades ago.
Yeah, well, listen, I agree with Linda Chavez and with you on this one. This has been a problem for a long time. We've had, and I think that's why it finally made its way to the Supreme Court. And again, Linda Chavez, fantastic. I've always enjoyed her work. She's the head of the Council on Equal Opportunity, or CEO. This is no other way to slice it but the reverse racism that I think was dealt with, was it this summer or last year, when they had this Supreme Court decision that finally, in effect, made it illegal to do this. Now, just like when they told Biden he couldn't forgive student debt, he figured out new ways to do it. They've done the same thing. I don't think any school has changed their admissions practices despite having a 14th Amendment that requires them to do that. So, yeah, I don't know if it's just Edward Bartlett that may not be making the impact that he'd like to have. But I think overall, you have these activists in Washington, or as he put them, these culture warriors in different organizations that are hell-bent on changing culture to their will and doing whatever they have to do in order to achieve that goal. And I agree with you. I think overall, there's a generalized mafia, if you will, in even getting into medical school. Like, why can't we open more medical schools? Why is it that we have to import people from overseas? Why do we need an immigration system that's going to provide us with medical doctors? I don't think we need that. Now, many can make the argument, and I would be among them sometimes, to make the argument and say, well, you know what? We have dumbed down our system of public education so badly that we're forced to accept foreigners in order to remain competitive in medicine. And that may be true. However, I would also argue that, within a generation or half a generation, we could get back to being the leader in that space where we produce the best doctors, the Ben Carsons of the world. It's all a question of, is there the will to do it? But there isn't a will to do it because there's all sorts of laws and I'm going to call it mafia, but it's really a monopoly that medical schools have where you can't even open new medical schools. I think we've opened one new medical school, where I live now in Jersey. They've opened one new medical school. Now, I guess they're going to continue to always pose the argument, well, no, we want to keep it so that it's competitive amongst all the schools and that we don't accept all the people. So 4,000 people apply, 400 get accepted. They try to protect their profession. However, ultimately, I think that hurts the people. And it's ultimately hurting the profession because we're bringing in, or at least hurting our country, whereas we have to import the talent. And obviously, this is, I don't think, when you have to import anything, whether it's medicine, talent, anything, steel, you name it, when you have to import things that you can't produce on your own and they're part of your critical infrastructure, and I would argue that doctors are part of our critical infrastructure in this country, we have a problem in the country, right? If you can't produce your own medicine, if you can't produce your own doctors, we have a problem. We've seen that in my entire lifetime. There's always been a bunch of nurses that have come from other countries, were trained in other countries, and were trained superior to those trained in the United States. Why? Because so many people here don't care about math. They don't care about so many of the sciences that they would need in order to be successful in nursing school or even medical school. And that's a trend that continues. And I think that's why in recent years you've seen such an emphasis put on what they call STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. And sadly, that's where we are. So, Paul, yeah, great job with those statistics. Excuse me, Frank. Great job with the statistics, because you're right. And that was 25 years ago, or 23, 24 years ago, and we're in the same exact place and probably worse off. So it's a problem that's not getting any better, and one that needs to be addressed. And right now, the only thing I see happening is it getting even worse with the situation that we have at the border. It's not a racial thing for me. I don't care what our doctors look like. I don't care where they come from. But I do think that we need strength in our nation. And when push comes to shove, our men and women, they go to war. And when they go to war, they need doctors. And doctors that serve in this military, my hope is that they're Americans. Now, nobody's saying that you can't come from another country and not be an American. Of course, you can become a naturalized citizen. There's all sorts of things you can do. But my point is, ultimately, we're creating problems, and the solution is outsourcing them from other countries. I think the solution needs to be to grow them from within. Thank you very much, Frank, for those stats. Folks, we're coming right back. The rest of your calls and more. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
I want to listen to you, Rich, all the time.
America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
There was actually a really interesting article in the New York Times about how states are increasingly the driving force when the federal government can't get things done, and we all may live to rue that day. But let me, in terms of what's going on at Trump, I want people to go after him legally for the big stuff. Right. I want the insurrection issues, the January 6th. If you're going to go after him for the stuff that really threatens America. I am uncomfortable. It's going after him for these other things at the state level. Go after him for what he really ought to be going after.
Now, that is Richard Haass. He's from the Council on Foreign Relations, and he was on the Morning Joke today saying he wants people to go after Trump legally for the big stuff. Mr. Haass, maybe you weren't paying attention, but Jack Smith, you remember him, the prosecutor from The Hague, the war crimes guy, special prosecutor that's likely unconstitutionally appointed by Biden. He's going after Trump for the big stuff. Right? He's going after him for January 6th, the alleged insurrection that didn't happen. That's not even one of the charges he's being charged with, and maybe that's what he's asking for. But they weren't able to go after him for that because he didn't engage in any insurrection. Right? I guess they'd have to create a new RICO charge to try and set him up on that one. The whole thing is fake. It's phony. It's fraud. And Richard Haass is not alone. There's a lot of people like him that want people to throw the book at Donald Trump. Many of them are in the media, the left within the media, a not so silent enemy like Mara Gay. Mara Gay is from the New York Times, and she was also on the Morning Joke today on MSNBC. And she's discussing Letitia James, saying it's hard to have sympathy for someone like Trump because of his braggadocious behavior. And then she says he should just pay his bills, as if a $500 million fine is, something anybody could just, throw around. Listen to this.
And so, yes, it is true that New York is now a solidly Democratic state. Wasn't always. But at the same time, he spent decades here not paying taxes. He spent decades not being held accountable while people all across New York City were evicted for not paying $800 in rent.
Right.
So I actually think that there's every reason to go after anybody who has potentially committed crimes. And, you know, afterwards, he has every right to appeal as well, just like any other American. So I say let the legal system play out. And, you know, it's hard to have sympathy because after his braggadocious behavior for all of these years, you know, yes, Trump Tower is at stake. Well, this is what happens. Again, all the rest of us have to pay the rent. We have to pay our bills. He should pay his.
Really, all the rest of us. You know, it's funny. I can't remember a single time where I'm not asking her to have sympathy. I'm asking her to just be normal, right? Just look at this, not as a hater. When was the last time you saw somebody taxed or fined $450? It's not like this is Elon Musk we're talking about, right? He's not the richest guy in the world. He's a real estate guy from New York. He's done well. But we also know that he lost $500 million while he was serving as president. I haven't seen anybody ever fined like this. And nobody has, because it's never been done. So for her to sit here and make it sound like Trump is some sort of deadbeat that's just not paying his bills, even if he was. I mean, let's just be frank here. Let's just say Trump had bills up the wazoo. It doesn't matter what your situation is. If you've got a fine that's unprecedented, that is designed to destroy you when you're a candidate for public office and you're the leading candidate, and in most polls, you're beating the other guy, and now the other guy weaponizes his pull and his own Department of Justice to go after you. How is it that it's not sympathy, ma'am? It's just looking at it for what it is. What happened in 2021? What happened in 2022? What happened in 2023? Nothing, right? Nothing happened in any of those years. Well, I guess at the end of 23, they decided to go after Trump. But, I mean, there was a good solid 2 years where they could have gone after Trump, but they didn't do a damn thing. So to just sit here and say recklessly that Trump should just pay his bills, no, ma'am, come on. Who do you know that they're threatening to take a $500 million away from in terms of a fine? Come on. And then to cancel you for 3 years and say you can't do business in New York when you've built your fortune in New York. This is the clearest example in my lifetime that I've seen of cruel and unusual punishment. Anyway, and that is Mara Gay from the New York Times. Now, I understand we have a minute to go, so I don't want to cut anybody off on the phones, but we're going to get to the phones right after this so that everybody has a chance to weigh in. Also going to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse and a couple of other things that are going on. So stick with us for that. Also, quick reminder, if you are subscribed to the podcast, thank you very much. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, I want to urge you to subscribe to the podcast. Now, if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't know, I don't do love podcasts, I just turn on the radio and I listen, that's fine. But what happens is sometimes some stations, this program airs on many stations, and some of those stations decide to make programming changes or play a sporting event, and we may get preempted. You can always go to richvaldez.com, click the Listen Live button right on the website, and you can hear the show live. Make sure you're doing that as well. Folks, don't go anywhere. We're coming right back. Open Phone America with me, Rich Valdez.
Mr. Call Screener, who is a budding radio star, by the way. Richie Valdez is terrific.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, folks, so Kyle Rittenhouse was at a university giving a speech when he was met with the not-so-warm reaction from the folks at the speech. Listen to this.
Members of the University of Memphis campus organization Turning Point USA chased out of the UC theater, followed by hundreds of protesters, just moments after Kyle Rittenhouse was booed off the stage inside.
Help me welcome Kyle Rittenhouse.
Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted of killing 2 men and wounding another during a Black Lives Matter rally in Kenosha, Wisconsin back in 2020. Rittenhouse was invited to the University of Memphis by the campus organization Turning Point USA. In a statement to WREG sent last week from their national headquarters, they tell us, quote, attempts to cancel or censor events like these only serve to stifle the exchange of ideas and limit the intellectual diversity to which students are exposed, end quote.
So there you have it. Kyle Rittenhouse shot it down. And I want to give an invitation to Kyle Rittenhouse. If you want to come on the program and talk about this, we'll give you the opportunity to discuss whatever you want here. And, safe space, right? It'll be a safe space where everybody's intellectual rigor will be tested and everybody will be comfortable, right? Nobody's going to boo you on the radio. We might take a few negative calls, but you're welcome to tell your story here. And I want to get the story of you all, the American people. There's so many of you out there with things to say tonight. 833-482-5337, 833-4-Valdez. Let me see my call screen here. We are going to go to Gene in Terre Haute, Indiana, WIBQ. Gene, what say you, sir?
Well, great show.
Thank you.
My question is to your legal authorities out there is, can they really seize Trump's properties after 30 days? I mean, should they not just be able to put a lien on it in lieu of bond? Or, that just sounds like third world country third world country to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. It sounds very third world. And I think you're right. The question should remain, like if you don't pay your mortgage, they don't take your house away in 2 seconds or in 30 days or anything like that. So, again, are they being extreme in the situation? Absolutely. And I think you're right. There should be a little bit more of a window here. And I think, something that Mara Gay said in that last clip where she says, that him and others have lived here for years in New York without ever paying taxes. This is not necessarily a crime, right? There's a lot of people, Amazon, Bezos, Trump, there's just a lot of people that have a tax system. And Trump brought this up when he ran for president with Hillary Clinton, saying that, he was guilty of paying off politicians to protect the tax code that allowed him to have these tax breaks. And it was one of the realest things that we'd ever heard. Even Dave Chappelle did a great expose on that. And if I find that audio, maybe I'll play it for you in the coming days. But my point is, I think your question is very valid. And what she's talking about is not so valid because she's making the case, in effect, of something I learned when I was a younger man, that what I eat does not make you fat. And that's why we have liberty. I can do what I want to do, and you can do what you want to do. And what I do doesn't affect you. And that's the bottom line. You can't live your life hoping that you're going to spend my tax contribution. I don't live mine that way because I don't rely on the government. Now, some smart ass out there is going to say that I do rely on the government because I like paved roads. Or, when I go to the city, I take the subway. And all of these things are funded by taxpayer dollars. Okay, granted. That's all true. But you know what? My family has a farm up in the mountains of Pennsylvania. There are no paved roads up there. There's also one sheriff for the whole county. And, that's not the guy you're going to call if there's a problem, right? You're taking care of that problem on your own. And the reality is that there are places that are like that. And you don't have to rely on the government for those things. I do rely on the government for national security, and I'm big on that, and I think many of us are. But ultimately, we can't have Mara Gay telling us that it's because of Trump that people are getting evicted. No, people are getting evicted because they don't pay their bills. It's not like he didn't pay his bill to live in his home. He owns his home and the homes of many others, right? He's got buildings with tons of condos and apartments. So I just think it's such an unfair comparison. But this is what we get, and this is what we see when we're dealing with the left. Thank you for your call, my brother. I appreciate it. Let us continue. Let us go to Paul in Boise, Idaho, listening online, richvaldez.com. Paul in Boise, go right ahead.
Good evening. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the sports problem that we're running up against when men intrude upon women's sports. The first time I kind of noticed that was during the 72 Olympics when I was watching it on TV, and I noticed that the East Germans, the swimmers in particular, outdid the other women in the meets. And of course, they all won gold. And they were cheating, but they couldn't prove it because it was doping before they could detect doping. And eventually, it got worse and worse and worse. And then when the wall did come down, then the East Germans kind of disbanded. But then we had Title IX, and we had pushback for the women. We're getting pushback because they wanted to get some kind of a way of making it worthwhile to have the sports. If you were a woman, you were like a second-class citizen almost. And I was very aware of that because I grew up in a household that had 5 women in it. And you can't get away from women when there's 5 of them in the house. And so I was very, very interested in what was going to happen. Well, okay, we got Title IX. And I say we because I felt part of it because I was hoping that they'd get what they deserved. And
right.
They did get it, and now they've taken it away from them with the ability to have these transgender women, I guess you could still call them, but they're men.
You're right. And this is exactly what Title IX was supposed to be stopping, right, and protecting. And instead, here we are redefining Title IX, redefining what a woman is. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Paul in Boise, I want to thank you for your call. And, folks, we continue with the rest of your calls. Let's go to, Debbie, Burlington, Vermont, WVMT. Debbie, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdez.
Hey, Rich.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
A couple things. First of all, Hunter Biden, I was reading about his, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact reference, but I'm sure it's easily retrievable. He was charging an exorbitant amount of rent for some property that he was on. I don't know.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, this is a Wilmington, Delaware property owned by Joe Biden, and Hunter Biden is the tenant, and he was paying way above market value for this apartment or this house. He was renting a house owned by Joe Biden and paying him way more than it was worth. And you're right. This is another example of overvaluing property. Yet there's no Judge Engeron coming after Hunter or Joe for inflating the value of anything. I mean, they might say because they didn't borrow any money from banks. But the reality is the banks weren't complaining about this. This whole thing was a fabrication. And this is why I got out of government. I'm going to tell you the truth. Not because of what they're doing to Trump, but because there are people that work in government. And I would say, honestly, probably north of the halfway mark, that understand how government works so well that they can make it work for them every single day, like 100% of the time. And that's how they amass power. It's not about getting the will of the people behind you. It's not about doing the right thing. It's about using the power of the state to accomplish your mission. And that is politics for many people. And it's sad. It's literally ambitus is what it was called way back in the early part of Rome. And I think those are the earliest reports that in the historical accounts of political corruption. And they called it ambitus. And it was just, it was unfortunate then. It's still unfortunate now. We're seeing the same thing of ambitus rearing its ugly head, where people are just corrupt and in our system of government. And it's almost as if we can't escape it. And I think a lot of it has to do with virtue, right? And so much of our constitutional system, the founders, those from the Enlightenment, those that were informed by the thinkers of the Enlightenment, everybody's saying the same thing, in effect, that if people don't uphold virtue, if Americans are not a virtuous people, none of these things that we have, our Constitution, our constitutional system, this experiment in a constitutional republic, none of it lasts if people fall by the wayside, if people become devoid of virtue. And sadly, I feel like we're on that slippery slope, and I don't know if we can go back uphill because it's been greased. They've greased the skids, Debbie.
But Rich, can I say something?
Sure.
Rich, if I were Trump's attorney, I would argue if this is overvaluing property and you're condemning it on one person, look at the other person. Look at Hunter Biden overvaluing property.
Yep, you're right. And I think it would be a perfect example of that. I honestly do. And I doubt we're going to see that happen because it seems to be the only people that do anything wrong are Trump or people in Trump's circle, sadly. Debbie, thank you for your call. Big shout out to everybody listening on WVMT in Vermont. Folks, we're coming right back with the rest of your calls and more in the Speed Round.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, folks, we continue with your calls on everything under the sun. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. Let's go to Montana, KOFI. Check in with our buddy Frank. Hey, Frank.
Hi. Hey, I just have to say kudos to Northern Ireland. Some of the independent media that's available in the newspapers up there. I mean,
what's going on over there?
There was an article where Donald Trump wanted to sue the country of Northern Ireland because his Trump Towers golf course was going to get overrun. The beach was going to be flooded, and the government was he was expecting them to build a wall to protect his beach from global warming. I guess it works over there, but not over here.
I haven't heard about that, but I do know he has a Trump Turnberry golf course, and one of my colleagues, who a former colleague of mine, Juliet Huddy, who really didn't like Trump much, but loved his property in Scotland to visit it, and she said it was really quite exquisite. So, yeah, we'll look into that and find out what's going on. I don't know anything about building a wall to protect the property, but it does sound interesting and definitely like the punchline to a joke. That's for sure. Frank in Montana, thank you, sir. KOFI in the building. Big shout out to Evergreen, Montana. And let us continue. We've got Karen is in Wasco, Oregon, listening on KUMA all the way on the West Coast. Karen, you're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I wanted to talk about, I just wanted to make a statement and ask if you think it's correct. Do you find that lots of times that when you have somebody as rich as Trump, and he has been, his mouth runs sometimes when it shouldn't, but I think that he's been that way most of his life because I've noticed that when I've watched him through the years. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that people use the reason that they don't like him, that he is so boisterous?
And what they use that reason that he's boisterous to do what? To go after him for different things?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, 100%. I totally think that's the case. And I think what they've done is try to make a new standard where when people don't like what a certain someone says, if we make the case that, well, we don't like this guy because he's a bull in a china shop, or he's a bully, or he's mean, or he's rich and he's bad and he's orange man bad, then somehow now we justify bad behavior. And that's why I always say it's not whether you like Trump or not. It's situational, right? We have to look at what we're actually doing, because they'll do it to you if you let them do it to him. Thank you very much for your call, Karen, in Wasco, Oregon. I got to hit a break right here. Big shout out to everybody on the West Coast, KUMA. Coming right back. Speed Round continues.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. And it is the speed round. I'm going to try to get to as many of these as we can. We're going to get straight to the point. Let's go to Jim in Chicago, WGN. Jim, what say you about immigration?
Hey, Rich. Okay, 300,000 plus illegal immigrants are being flown on commercial airliners to 43 or 48 different U.S. cities. How do the Republicans miss that many people?
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I don't know that they did miss them. I know that some of them sounded the alarm as soon as they found out about it, and we're now dealing with that. So I don't know that we are in a situation where they're not acting on it. I think this is a situation where they've got their hands tied. The best that we've seen is that they killed the bill that came from the Senate. Mike Johnson, I think, is doing as good a job as anybody can do. I agree with you that we can be more assertive, but we have to. Rumsfeld once said, and I'm not a huge Rumsfeld fan per se, but there were some things he said that were right. And he said, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want. And I think that's what we've got. You can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican. If you want to be an independent, what do you get? Bernie Sanders, Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema. There's 5 people. So it's one of those things where we've got to go with what we've got. Thank you, my brother, for the call. We continue. Let us see. Where do we go from here? We go to Linda, WGDJ, New York. Quickly, what are your thoughts on transgenders in sports?
Thank you for taking my call, Rich, and all you do. It's great. If I had a transgender child, I would try to steer him towards the music world. If you're competing with a girl for first chair in an orchestra, it only depends on how much both of you are practicing.
Right. Yeah. Listen, I say get involved in anything you want. I really don't care. Just don't make it dangerous for anybody else that's involved. If you start putting boys into girls' sports, girls can get hurt. And I think it's just unfair. And ultimately, I think there should be their own transgender division. I see that my buddy Pat in Sedona, Arizona is online. Pat, the music means they're kicking both of us out of here, but there is no jury in that trial. It is the judge that makes the decisions, and that's why this is being railroaded. Folks, thank you for your call. For those of you on hold that couldn't get through, I apologize. Thank you for your call. If you call tomorrow, you'll be the first ones in, I promise. Count Galacula will keep note of that. Hasta la próxima. Take care, good night, and God bless you, America. I am Rich Valdez.